Good morning, and nice to see a few people here on a Sunday morning. Um, Natasha is visiting us from London, and she's leaving tonight, actually. So um, we're going to talk about her new book, which has just come out earlier this year, called Universality. And it follows on the heels of her earlier book, which was very successful and won several prizes. And so this one's been received with great anticipation. Um, and she, well, I should tell you a little bit about Natasha. She studied mathematics and has had a long career in finance. Um, working in banks and looking at risk assessment and hedge funds and sort of really the kind of cutting edge of corporate finance in London. And then she decided at some point to take a break and to write, and has obviously met with great success. And she says that she's probably going to go back to working in finance, but I somehow doubt it if she continues to write, at this pace and with this degree of success, of appreciation for her work. So let me start. This is actually a very interesting and, in a sense, a complex book, although it looks sort of, it looks like a slim little volume, but it's actually quite a difficult book in some sense. And I'll begin there, Natasha, by asking how how is this a novel? I mean, how do you draw the line between fiction and non-fiction, and is there a particular reason why you make it uh, sort of difficult almost to understand what genre this book belongs to? Is it really a novel? Uh, because a lot of it is written in the style of long form reportage, um, non-fiction, but it is still nonetheless a piece of fiction. So tell us about your experiment with genre and the reason that you chose to do this. I'm not sure if you've done this in your earlier book as well, but you've definitely made a choice there, which is why we titled this session, why we decided to talk about language in particular. So tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So this book starts off in an abandoned farm in the north of England where these hippie anarchists have taken up residence and want to build a new kind of society. And unfortunately, their leader is brutally sort of attacked with a solid gold bar. And that's really the mystery at the center of this novel. So this novel sort of starts out as a mystery. A young journalist sets out to kind of uncover the truth behind this attack. And her article she writes goes viral online, and as you said, it makes up the first chapter of the novel. And then each subsequent chapter is much more sort of conventional storytelling from the point of view of one of the key characters involved in the mystery. And it feels experimental. I think certainly when you think of it under the sort of literary fiction umbrella, it feels quite experimental.
Yeah.
But really, I was borrowing very heavily from mystery writers. In the mystery genre, in the thriller genre, they often begin with a piece of found text, whether it's reportage, whether it's someone's diary. It's very common. And I actually really wanted to play with that genre because mystery readers, they're some of the least trusting, most suspicious readers you find. Like, they don't believe anything that's on the page. They're always trying to tear apart. No, you've told me this, but what's actually happening? And that was entirely the type of reading I wanted to encourage and bring to the page because I was really interested in the ways that I think in recent decades, essentially, ever since sort of in about the 60s when Tom Wolfe came up with this new style of journalism he called the New Journalism, and they very deliberately took techniques from novels and applied that to non-fiction writing. And it was seen as an experiment at the time, but it's commonplace today. Most of the long-form writing we see online today has this style. So I thought, well, when journalism gets closer and closer and closer to the form of a novel, and actually you get this strange time where, certainly in the UK, a lot of journalists become novelists. And also me, on the basis of having written a novel, was getting commissioned to write journalism. So when the lines are so blurred, what happens if you smash them together in a book? Does it allow us to kind of question something about how journalism works? And particularly in a time when, for most of us, journalism on our phone, it's competing with movies, it's competing with other kinds of stories. When journalism is entertainment, what does that mean about how we think about the truth?
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, you've put that very well. That investigative reporting and investigative journalism is trying to get at a reality or a truth that is somehow eluded us, right? And it's not known at first, and then you have to arrive at it through this process of reportage and interviewing people and comparing facts against the kinds of claims that your people make, that you go and meet, and so on. And a mystery novel also, I guess, is, it's a stylized presentation of what is essentially an investigation, right? So it's clever to blur the line there, I think. But it also goes to the question of the truth, as you said. I mean, in earlier times, before social media, you would say, you would take on good faith and at face value, right? Even the fiction of a mystery novel, you would assume that the idea is to get at the bottom of the mystery, right, and to solve it, right? If it was about a case or whatever it is, really getting at the truth was the point. Whereas today, a lot of news and a lot of supposed reportage, is deliberately manufactured, and it's fake, right? It couldn't be further from the truth, and you cannot believe it just because, you might trust some publications and some platforms, but most of the time, you are a little doubtful about what it is that you're dealing with. And I suppose AI really complicates that to the nth degree, because really, who is even generating this text? How are these words appearing before you when there's no human agency there, right? So I think it's very sort of astute to land on this kind of problem as the central problem of your book. But I wanted to just look into the themes that you've addressed, which are very, very contemporary and, in a sense, really closely located in British culture and British society, and the problems that Britain is facing, at this moment, which are existential in nature. And it's a combination of, like we were talking about, what is happening to Britain after Brexit, after COVID, and as it tries to redefine itself on the basis of, a new balance of people, of races, and of identities that actually make up this new Britain, right? So most of the struggles are over identity, it seems to me. Apart from, not just identity vis-a-vis Europe, but also identity within the UK, and hence all the discussion about, woke and anti-woke, movements, in a sense, and DEI and affirmative action, and race and gender politics, but so intense that that becomes the kind of public culture of discussing these issues. Um, how do you see how do how do you see the political scene in the UK at this moment, um, uh, changing the very nature of literature, let's say. I mean, in the most abstract sense. Yeah.
Well, I actually think it comes back a lot to what you were saying about the way that trust in the media has changed and trust in the news has changed.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good point you mentioned around social media that I think has made us notice it a lot more.
Yeah.
But actually, particularly when we look back at historical reporting, you take sort of Britain's colonial history, there were things that were written in the news that by most sort of objective measures weren't true. But there was total trust in the news. And I think now that things have moved online and if anything we're suffering from an information overload, that issue is a lot clearer. But I think it's something more fundamental. There's a journalist called Janet Malcolm who talks about what she calls the journalistic eye, this first person narrator that is who's talking to us when we read the news. And you're absolutely right, we trust it implicitly. The sort of trappings of authority, the way it's printed, the presentation, all of these things make us completely believe that we're not reading critically, we're reading to be informed.
Yeah.
And I was really interested in the way that a novel can sort of question that, because when we see the first person in a novel, we immediately think unreliable narrator. We don't trust it. So I really wanted to try and exploit that gap in trust and see where it comes from.
Right.
And then to get back to what you were talking about, I suppose the tenor of the conversation in the UK, I think the interesting thing is it's not just in the UK, sort of in the last 10 years or so, newspapers and magazines, they've made their money not from subscriptions or sort of simple adverts where we all turn over the page and see the same advert. They increasingly make their money from online adverts.
Yeah.
So every time we click on an article, a high frequency auction takes place that shows us an ad.
Yeah.
And they get less than a penny to show us that advert. So they need hundreds of millions of views every day to be able to be profitable.
Right.
So actually, the newspapers and the magazines, they hire the same sort of data scientists that casinos use to keep people saying one more article, wanting to read more and more. And actually, the editors at news desks now, they're given that data. And they're given how their stories are performing, and that shapes what they commission, how they headline what they're commissioning, how much space things are being given.
Right.
So that changes the nature of the conversation and the way that we as the people, the readers, become informed. So of course then that has the follow-on effect of sort of changing our entire discourse. The sorts of topics that become big news stories, they might not be things that actually affect our lives. Those are just the things that keep us clicking. So I was really interested in, I suppose, the nature of that cycle, because I feel while I forget his name, but is it Alan Rusbridger, who used to run The Guardian?
I know
in
him,
his memoir, he talks about the digitization of the news. And there's sort of been a little bit of non-fiction accounts of how it's changed from being in the news. But I don't think we have much media, fiction or non-fiction, that engages with how that's changed the kinds of stories and the kinds of truths that we're told and the way we talk to each other. So that was really what I was fascinated in, less the specifics of this term, this argument, that argument, but actually what's the broader context that's shaping the way that we relate to one another.
Right. Actually, what's interesting is that sometimes, even though you know, especially if you're in the business of writing or reading or teaching or journalism or, literature, etc., you know that there's an algorithm that is not just influencing but driving your choices and your options, and that is pushing you in a certain direction to come to certain conclusions and so on. But even knowing that, there's no way to get behind it, right? I mean, you can't sort of break that that illusion and get around it in any way at the actual thing, right? There's no, we are almost helpless now because of the way that, the big media organizations sort of control our access to the world. I mean, literally, we can't rely on our own eyes anymore.
I think there's absolutely that. And I think also one thing that is probably quite lacking in schools and sort of younger education is this real sort of media literacy.
Yes.
Because I think today, to be able to consume the news, to be able to consume information, we all essentially need to be experts in sort of understanding sources, understanding who's writing, what the framing is. We need these tools, and we don't get them in school. You know, like you mentioned, I studied maths. I didn't get it in my maths degree.
No, so I mean, even journalists don't get them, I feel.
But it's a lot to ask, you know, when you're reading your newspaper in the morning over your coffee. It's a lot to ask.
Right. No, but that hermeneutic of suspicion, you know, as we call it in literary theory, I mean, you have to sort of maintain that at all times. And sometimes you're like, I just couldn't be bothered. You know, I just want to read this next nonsense story about whatever, and I just want to, you know, go to bed. I don't, you know, I just can't keep like fighting this all the time. And you have those characters in your book who are trying, you know, to exit capitalism in some sense, and just, I mean, they're ridiculous. They're pathetic, you know. I mean, they may be sincere, but they're still ridiculous, right?
They're completely sincere, but I think the thing is, when you decide to reject the social structures of your society, there is something a little bit ridiculous in it. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, but it doesn't pan out so well in the book.
Yeah, but also that, you know, in the 60s, when you had, you know, this kind of refusal of capitalism and you know, the rejection of the colonial past, and you know, a lot of this utopian ideology was expressed itself in the arts and creative expressions of various kinds, and alternative culture of counterculture of all kinds, you know. There was something still hopeful about it. But I feel that today it's so much harder to, you know, to be believable if you're trying to be a squatter, you know, or Occupy is like so far away from civil disobedience where it might have begun 100 years ago.
There's a lot more cynicism. I think you're absolutely right. And also I think much more of an awareness that to be able to say, I reject this, I'm going to sort of disobey and do what I'm not supposed to do, you probably need to come from a position of security, financial security, sort of status in your community. Not everybody can do it. And so I think the real earnest sort of intent combined with essentially it's sort of rich kids messing around is what creates this tiresome response to it, I think.
Right, and it's so interesting that you know, this woman, one of the characters is called India, you know, as though gesturing to, you know, the hippies who came to India and the beats and so on. But, you know, that's just her name. And somebody says, oh, what's her name, China? You know, and it's just hilarious because that shows you, you know, the kind of tokenism and the really surface identity politics at work. And then at another point, somebody says, "Oh, if we're going to make this into a film or whatever, we need to, or into a TV show, the main culprit needs to be black, but he's not." And that's kind of the whole point, right? That it's this disenfranchised, disgruntled, white working class individual, you know, who feels completely left out of the mainstream, which is what has brought Trump to power in the U.S. You know, the reflex is still that, oh, if he's poor, he must be black, right? And let's just make him that in our story. And it's kind of, again, it really sort of, you know, it's shocking because it's, you know, sometimes you just think that being woke is just the flip side of being racist. But the two things go together, right? They're not, one doesn't make sense without the other. And it's so easy to switch around and change sides.
There's just such a lack of nuance, I think, particularly in storytelling. And I think the interesting things about books are they're relatively cheap.
Yeah.
All a book really costs is my time. For the publisher to print it, it doesn't cost them that much for them to sell it.
Right.
So people can take risks in books, and you can kind of be subtle, and you can kind of play around with expectations. But if you're making a TV show or a movie, that's costing millions, tens of millions.
Right.
So they're like, we want to hit the story beats and the stereotypes that we know are going to play well. So you get this real flattening of narrative.
Exactly.
And I was really interested in kind of, I guess, nodding at it, because we've all seen it. We've all seen adaptations, I think, of things we like that have made questionable choices.
Right.
And it's this thing that's so commonplace, but at the same time keeps happening.
Yeah.
And we don't ever seem to kind of, I think, move beyond it a little bit more. Whereas I think one of the really interesting things about books is, number one, as I mentioned, they're so cheap, so people can take risks with them. There isn't a producer and all of these sorts of things. But also they're really slow. I think publishers are probably a bit sad of this. By the time you realise that the book isn't doing as well as you want, it's too late, it's already printed. You don't get to immediately see when people click out of the book. They've already got it. But I think that slow feedback loop really encourages interesting reflection and interesting sort of approaches.
Right. Which the speed of, new media and social media is absolutely against. So that's why we have the slow reading movement, right? Every kind of slow living, slow food, and things like this, which people have tried, I think, to. But I do feel that it's very sad for young people. That I don't know, like these movements, Occupy Wall Street or Black Lives Matters or Extinction Rebellion and so on. It's hard to go into them knowing what you're up against, but also knowing that the rebellion will ultimately still result in extinction. I mean, it's. So I think in some ways your novel is or your book is an interesting sort of it's like almost a generational conflict, right, between Gen Xers and millennials or Gen Z, where we're coming from two different worlds. We still grew up without the internet, right? And we still know what a book is and how to read it, and we still know how to write. Which young people these days don't know. And I teach sometimes at university, and I see that these kids are just from a different world. They may be from the same country or the same city that their teachers are, but they inhabit a completely different sense of reality. And I think you bring that across very powerfully. These competing realities. Where even when people get in the same house, the same farmhouse, literally, or even if it's mother and son, they are not cohabiting a shared space, a shared public space, right? And there is a kind of complete breakdown in communication between these different fragments of humanity.
No, I think that's absolutely right. There's a real gap in understanding and also gap in experience, I think, between generations. And, from the sort of my perspective and one of the perspectives of the characters in the book, he grew up, he was the son of a builder, not very well off. He went to sort of a grammar school, he studied physics, went to university, became a banker, and suddenly found himself very wealthy. And can't really relate culturally to his wife and his daughter because their experiences have been so totally different to him. So for a character like him, the generational changes have been positive in a way, in the sense that he had access to a world that his parents didn't.
Right.
But then when you take a look at in the creative space, so there's this young journalist, Hannah, who writes the article at the beginning of the novel, and she's struggling. She's trying to become a freelance writer. She believed in the dream that, she could go to university and be a writer. And she is struggling. She can barely make ends meet. It's a really tough life for her.
Right.
And in the end, when she can't get any more commissions, she gets a job.
She just needs 65 pounds of
a little bit of money to be able to make her ends meet, and she can't do it as a writer. She gets just a normal job at a shop. And the sudden relief of just a job where actually you know you're getting a paycheck, you know you can pay the bills. That's her experience, and that's really what's driving why she feels so on edge and so, really lacks comfort.
Right.
Then there's this older journalist in the novel, Lenny, who's in her 50s. She's basically, at the beginning of the book, she's this sort of oddball character that we kind of glimpse, but by the end we realise that actually this is Lenny's book, this is Lenny's story. But she came of age, or at least saw a time in the 90s when there were a lot of these women journalists in London in particular. They came from all over the UK, moved to London. They didn't really have an education, they didn't have experience, but they just had this firebrand personality style of writing, and they were given jobs in the newspapers and became big names and very wealthy and changed their lives. And so Lenny's this character who's like a half generation younger than them. She watched these women, she feels a bit resentful that she didn't get their chance, but also now she feels that this is her chance and she's going to take it. And I think that real difference in the creative industries, where for a lot of people, I notice especially meeting more and more writers now, they see the 90s in London as this golden age where anyone could become an artist. Whereas certainly I think for younger people today, it doesn't seem at all possible. And even for me, I didn't ever think of writing as something to do with my life. It was something I did once I'd worked for a long time and felt that, you know what, I'll take a writing class. I'll have some fun. But I think the young people, a lot of them have to make the pragmatic choice now.
Right. Sorry, just keeping an eye on the time here. So I wanted to ask you, well, a couple of things, but one of them is, in a way, the evidence, or whatever. No, not the evidence. The stolen item, right, is literally.
I think you can say it. It's on the cover of the book.
Yeah, that's right. No, it's literally this bar of gold, right? Which is. I mean, that's clearly a trope, right? That's clearly like sort of a symbol of what's at stake, what's of value, right? What is it that this guy is actually stealing? He's not. It's not, and when once he steals it, there's nothing he can do with it because you can't trade it in for anything because it will get caught, right? And it's heavy, and it's. It's a very odd. I mean, if you were to steal a piece of jewelry or a painting or I don't know, some sort of a regular bank heist or something, that would be one thing. But there's this very peculiar, particular item, which is at the head of the story and which sets off this chain of events and, takes us into the plot. So, is that intended as a commentary on the very notion of capital or the notion of value or the notion of, it's fool's gold in a sense, right? But it's also solid gold, right? I mean, there's so many ways in which it's a very rich symbol, but it's also completely unrealistic in a sense.
So that's the interesting thing about it. It seems ludicrous and unrealistic.
Yeah.
And it's interesting.
Like, who keeps a bar of gold in their house and then somebody runs off with it, in their backpack? I mean, really.
A very strange thing happened after the 2008 crash. So the people working in banks, a lot of them, they weren't rich.
Yeah.
They weren't from fancy backgrounds. They were people who, some of them were market traders and got into it. Some of them went to uni and then got into it. But all these people who'd never had money before were suddenly living these flash lifestyles, doing these important jobs, nice seats, all of this. And then suddenly everything gone. Yeah. They lost their jobs. That was it. Just instantly the music stopped. Yeah. And the interesting thing was the people, and it was mostly men who kept their jobs and remained working and made it through to the other side and started earning again. Yeah. A lot of them bought gold. They bought physical gold and they held on to it. They held this thing that couldn't lose its value. And this thing that they knew they could protect their family with. And it's a crazy thing to do, but it's also such a human thing to do. And I felt it was really fascinating, this thing that multiple people had the same idea.
It's like, in India, I mean, a woman's only access to wealth usually is the gold jewelry she's given at her marriage. and she gets to keep that even if the marriage breaks up. I mean, that is, a woman's kind of security.
But even
Literally.
engagement rings, some people look at them that way.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, like
no,
this
but
thing
I'm
that you
talking
hang on
about
to.
some sort of whatever. Like the parents will save up their entire lives to be able to give their daughter a bit of gold, which is always an insurance against, some future catastrophe. And women, if they are not earning or they're not working and they don't have, or even if they are, they don't have access to the family, pot of money, their jewelry, their gold jewelry is something that, I mean, you don't sell gold except in absolutely unimaginable, adversity.
Because in those situations, you can trust it.
You can trust it,
Yeah.
but I'm just surprised that, uh, you know, uh, as recently as 2008 or something, that people in this rarefied world of corporate finance are resorting to this kind of a solution to the problem
It's
of
crazy,
security.
and some of the characters point it out that it's so
Yeah,
crazy. But it is,
yeah.
I think, especially when you're working with these strange financial products and constructs that
Yeah.
seem so abstract.
Exactly. So I was going to ask you, sorry to interrupt, but I mean, this is the age of crypto and Bitcoin, which is completely dematerialized wealth, right? But you have gone back to, a primordial form of wealth, which has been there since the beginning of civilization, probably,
Well,
right?
I think that's true, but also we always, because I guess there were the penny stocks back in, when was that in the US, but everyone was speculating and investing. I think there have always been these times when people think they're going to get rich quick, and then there's times when we all retreat to safety and we retreat
Right.
to things like gold, things like diamonds, things that feel safe.
Right. But, in the end, you don't get away with it. That seems to be the.
But it doesn't help.
It doesn't
Richard
help,
at
yeah,
all.
it really-
The guy, the banker who owns this gold
Yeah.
bar, it causes him more problems than it
It
solves.
causes him more problems. It causes the thief. I mean, it ruins the thief's life in a sense, right? Because he has no. So he may have the bar of gold in his possession, but unless he has the social capital to actually trade it in for something of real value, it's just a heavy. It could well be a brick or something.
Absolutely, and I think it was, because as you mentioned, is it a
Yeah.
metaphor? One of the characters calls it a MacGuffin, like something
Yeah,
that everyone's
yeah,
chasing.
exactly.
And one of the hippies who's taken over the house, he's
Yeah.
talking about it as this metaphor for capitalism, hit him
Yeah.
over the head. But I think one of the most interesting responses to it is the thief, when
Yeah.
he's looking at it and he's like, is this value? Am I holding value in my
Yeah.
hands? Like, what is wealth? What is money? What is
Right.
value? Because
Right.
they're concepts we're so used to, but they are constructs. And
Right.
there is the banker who owns the bar, Richard, at one point he says money is belief.
Yeah.
And I think there's something really true in that. Things hold value because we believe they hold value.
Right.
And we're willing to exchange based on that belief. But it's
Right.
very fragile.
Right. Right. I mean, economics is ultimately trust, isn't it? Or sort of also risk, taking a risk, because that trust may or may not be honored in the end, right? So I think you obviously bring your experience in the financial world.
I don't have any gold.
Well, I wasn't going there, but I mean, maybe your writing is your gold, your pot of gold, and you shouldn't you shouldn't take it lightly, I guess. I wanted also to ask you one more thing. Actually, I just wrote it down. Yeah, I wanted to ask you. So, this is something that, as an Indian, I don't understand, which is that why in Europe and in especially in the UK, there is so much churn and anger around immigration and immigrants and refugees and people of color coming into these so-called white fortresses. I mean, it's almost as though there's a complete lack of self-awareness about imperialism and colonialism and what the world was like hardly 80, 90 years ago. So in a way, I mean, I don't it's difficult for me to comprehend why why colonialism and decolonization are never factored in to the discussion around immigration. Right?
Well, it's
Why
very
are these? I mean, these chickens are coming home to roost. I mean, that's just you went out and you conquered the world. You impoverished large parts of the world. You disenfranchised people, and now they're sort of returning to sort of ask for their share in a sense. But you're not willing to let them in, as though they were somehow taking away something that is rightfully yours. But it was stolen in the first place, right?
I mean, I think the answer is very easy, actually. We're not taught colonial history at school. We're simply not taught about it. So we don't know that it actually happened. And, what's worse in the UK's sense is they burnt a lot of the documents, the historical documents they held that recorded what they did. I think for some of the other European countries, they were a bit smarter and never wrote it down.
Yeah.
But when you take history away, people will grow up with absolutely no context. And it is confusing. And even sort of very much more recent history, after World War II, the UK lacked a lot of people, and a lot of building needed to be done. The health system needed to be populated with staff. So they actively brought people from the colonies to work in the UK. They were begged to come, actually.
Right.
And these weren't people who weren't doing skilled work. They would take graduates, sort of like a graduate of nursing school, a mechanic who was already trained, and bring them over to work in these jobs.
Right.
And at first that works fine, because there's a very clear delimitation. There's the English people, and then there's this class of people who are just doing some work for us.
Right.
But what happens is a generation passes, another generation passes, and actually...
They're assimilated.
Exactly that, but also it feels not fair. Because I think there was always the sort of construct of class in the UK, certainly, was always underwritten by the construct of race. No matter what class you were in, you always had your race, and you couldn't fall below your race's circumstances. But suddenly, when things are a bit more equal, that actually feels a lot worse if you were used to things being a bit easier. So, of course, there's some resentment and some disenfranchisement.
I know, but I mean, and I totally get it at one level, but I still wonder how it makes any sense to speak of people of color in the UK as outsiders, foreigners, or immigrants, when I mean, they were colonial subjects till fairly 3-4 generations ago, and then now they've probably been living in the UK and become naturalized citizens over again 2 or 3 generations. I mean, where are they supposed to go, really? And how can you have these... I mean, your central characters, trying to say that she understands the anger against woke, so-called woke culture and DEI, right? But it's essentially an unfair and unjust argument.
I think beyond that, it's simply illogical. I had a few years ago, surreal experience with an Australian journalist. So she'd moved over to the UK 10 years ago or so.
Yeah.
And, she was in poor health. She was a smoker. She's a freelance journalist. That's what she does. And she said, well, why are you coming here? Like, why did you come to the UK as an immigrant? And I was like, I'm sorry, but you're the immigrant, actually.
Right.
Like, I'm English.
I was born here. Yeah.
But I think when you're talking to people like that, there's simply no logic. And I think, for me, I feel what this book is really about is not trying to engage with it logically, but to understand the feelings.
Right.
Because these are feelings people are having.
Which are
and
utterly illogical.
They're illogical,
they're unhistorical.
and they're very unkind, I think, and ungenerous, and also harmful for the people holding the feeling. Because, so that younger journalist, Hannah, she feels really resentful. She feels other people are getting opportunities she hasn't got. And then when she gets her magical opportunity to write this article, she moans so much that the woman who gave her the opportunity blocks her number. So she lost her chance. And I think there's that real, when you're focused in on what's unfair.
Yeah.
And each of the characters in the book feels that something, and sometimes they're reasonable in that feeling, feels that something's been unfair.
Yeah.
But that limits you too. And so I don't really know that we can solve it with logic or we can solve it with reason. I think
Yeah.
this is just the situation, certainly, that
Yeah.
we're going to be in for a while.
You know, Pankaj Mishra wrote this book called The Age of Anger, where the central concept, and he's talking about global politics and he is talking about colonialism, is resentment. You know, and resentment is sort of the flavor of our age, in a sense. You know, and of course we are seeing it in the U.S. now. You know, full blown. But yeah, it nevertheless seems to me that um, that the I mean, having more equity and inclusion, having more affirmative action, having more equal opportunity and more kind of gender blind and empowering policies, that was the right way to go. But we seem to have reached a point politically where all of this is being rejected. I mean, in the US, it's really going very far, so far as to say, you know, denying abortion rights and things like this. But they're really undoing all of the gains of liberal democracy, right, to uh, become smaller and smaller. But it flies in the face, as you're saying, of the reality of Britain today, which is, you know, which can have an Indian prime minister or whatever it is. I mean, really, and where women are everywhere, and people of color constitute an enormous section of the population, maybe even more of, or at least half the population. I don't know the facts and figures, but I'm just saying
I
that.
think the Daily Mail will tell you that. I don't think it's quite there yet.
Right, right. So, I mean, I think this, you know, running off with the bar of gold, you know, in a sense of basically everyone trying to get their hands on privilege of some sort.
And lashing
know.
out with it. You know, when
You
the
know.
thief steals this bar,
And then
he
like
attacks.
breaking the other
Yeah.
guy's head with it, like literally.
It's irrational. It ruins his life.
Yeah,
But that's
yeah.
what he wants to do in that moment.
Right.
That's
right.
where we are, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's brilliant. It's fascinating and it's brilliant, and I congratulate you again for being able to sort of imagine this.
Well, you mentioned you were in London around the time that the events
That's
in the
right.
novel were taking place.
That's right. I mean, I could really sort of feel it because yes, I was in England a lot between 2017 and 2020, and and I was there much earlier as a student in the 90s. You know, at the height of the post-colonial and the sort of Empire Writes Back, and you know all these writers in English, including from India, mainly from India, and Salman Rushdie was still living in the UK, and you know, I mean, it was such a moment of the multicultural, you know, renaissance in a sense, and now, you know, at the end of the 2010s, post the Wall Street collapse and all this, and Brexit. My God, I mean, it was the most traumatic and horrible sort of thing to see. I mean, to see this edifice just collapsing in front of your eyes, and people seem not to be able to stop it, you know. It's like a train wreck. It's just in slow motion. And as an outsider, you can just see it. And I could really identify very well with the kind of mood that you've, you know, plugged into for purposes of this novel. But I have to open it up to the audience. We have just a couple of minutes. If there are any questions, please put your hands up. Yeah, there's a lady here. Okay, well, you go first and then.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, Natasha. Hope you had a good time in Kochi.
A wonderful time.
I just wanted to ask you about how you shifted from, let's say, a previous career and then suddenly decided to take a writing class and to the moment when you got out your first book, like from writing to printing like, or release.
I think one of the biggest things was that I was always a reader.
Yeah.
I was always encouraged to read. My parents probably were way too permissive. I could read anything. I just scarred myself, I think, with A Clockwork Orange and all sorts of other things when I was too young. But I think one of the most special things about not studying literature is that books were always fun to me. Books were always enjoyment to me, and I remember when I'd come home from uni in the holidays and I'd just have a stack of books and I'd lie on the couch and just read them, and so it was always a pleasure for me. And then the interesting thing was, when I sort of was in my 20s, I was working, I had disposable income, I started buying books as they came out, which is something I'd never really done before. I'd read from the library, I'd read classics, but it really gave me, I guess, my own taste in what was contemporary. And I also became very interested in my late 20s in linguistics. I really always had a curiosity about, I suppose, neutrality in language and really how to assess that and how to think about that. So I basically took like an undergraduate syllabus and started reading through it, getting the books and studying. And I think all of that background, that curiosity meant that in 2019, when I took my first writing lesson, I was drawing on a lot. There's the gap between what you can actually write, which is awful at first, and what you know that you like. But I think when you've got your own taste, it actually is a much faster process to produce what you want to produce. So I worked on my first book while I was working full time. I just had no social life, didn't go to the gym or anything for a year. And then, yeah, I kind of always knew I wanted in my 30s to take a career break. And I thought, you know what, I'll do it. I'll be a writer for a bit, and it's been incredible. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful session. I had a great time reading your book. And it's quintessentially a very British story, but the way we classify people, like on a spectrum, far right, right, center, left, that I think is very global. And as a reader, and also because it starts with like a genre of mystery, the reader wants to know the allegiance of the author. So I was wondering how tough or easy it was for you to not reveal your allegiances, because you're like, at one point you're like, oh, she's making fun of the woke, oh, she's making fun of the far right, but it seems like you're making fun of everyone. So how tough or easy was it for you? Thank you.
I think it was quite easy in a way, because my secret position that's built into all of my books is that young people should consider a career in STEM. I think that is my secret position that my books all try and get through. So all of the other stuff, it's just kind of smoke and mirrors. But it is interesting with this book, because from some people, you hear them say, oh, this proves it, you know, she's a capitalist, like, you know, she's so like centre-right. And for other people, they're like, this is clearly socialist propaganda. And I feel like that's when you know you hit the balance, because everyone's mad at you.
Are there more questions? No, we are out of time. We are out of time. Okay, so Natasha will be available to sign books.
And you as well?
Yeah. Yeah, and we need to clear the venue for the next session. Thank you so much. Thank you, Natasha.